Welcome, everyone. Thanks. Welcome to SCA and Barista Guild of America. Welcome to San Francisco. Our Bay Area coffee community is a mighty one and a strong one and a diverse one, and we're proud to have San Francisco hosting this great event, and a lot of people coming from all over the country or around the world. Our session here is called Fast, Cheap, Good, Pick Two, Specialty Convenience Coffee. And so anyone who's been paying attention to the specialty coffee industry over the past 15, 20 years, we've gone through a certain kind of arc, and the story's obviously not over. It's continuing to evolve. A lot of the early 2000s through the end of 2000s were really spent trying to differentiate ourselves from what we might call second wave coffee, more either commercial coffee or the kind of coffee where it's essentially like fast food. And we've been trying to elevate the coffee experience and not only deliver that to our consumers, but establish sort of a foothold for ourselves as an industry. That said, one might say that that was a certain kind of adolescence where there's time to grow up. And as we continue on in terms of evolving our specialty coffee industry, we continue to change and evolve. And what's emerged over the past 5-10 years is this growing category that, like a lot of things, seemed at first to be contradictory, but more and more we're trying to understand and really kind of essentially make a point and sell it to the marketplace. And that is the idea of convenience coffee, that specialty coffee isn't something that takes 10, 15 minutes, but can be something that's quick, that can be something that's cheap, that's good, and so on. And so we have a great panel today that represent a few of the corners or the categories within that realm. And I'm going to introduce them one at a time. First, round of applause for Tony Konechny. Tony's from Yes Please. He lives in Los Angeles, California. Yes Please is related to Local, which is a interesting new dynamic story in the food world. And Tony's also sometimes known as Tonks. So welcome, Tony. I'm going to ask each person the same question. Can you just give a quick 2-minute your coffee story, like how you got to where you are today?
Oh man, a 2-minute version of that. So I think like most people, I ended up in coffee kind of by accident. That I thought I wanted to get out of the rat race and avoid having a real job. So I started working in a coffee shop, fell in love with espresso, fell into roasting, just kind of made my way down the coast with coffee. And I think always feeling, and I think this is true of a lot of us, that you have one foot in the industry and another foot kind of on the consumer side, that we're our most enthusiastic customers in addition to working inside of the industry. So I think kind of wrestling with feeling critical of the industry that I'm also a part of, and the back and forth between that is kind of the dynamic that.
How many years have you been in coffee now?
I don't know, I guess 15, 16.
Cool. Well, round of applause for Tony. Next, we're going to bring up Kent Sheridan. Kent is from Voila Coffee in Bend, Oregon. And Kent might represent the other end as far as a relative newbie. Tell us your coffee story.
This many years. I guess I come from a light film background, and I left that industry because I didn't like it very much, and found myself applying to be a barista. They turned me down, and that made me really mad. So I decided I'm going to do it myself. So I created a coffee cart and have been working in coffee for 4 years now. And beyond the cart, selling that business, I've been really focused on trying to find solutions in white spaces in the industry. And that's kind of me.
One more big round of applause for Kent. Next, we're going to bring up Umeko. Come on up, Umeko. Umeko Motoyoshi is the head of coffee at Sudden Coffee, based right here in San Francisco. Tell us your coffee story.
Hi. Yeah, so I am half Norwegian and half Japanese, and my dad was a Japanese tea ceremony master. So I, from childhood, was really enthralled with how you can make someone feel when you serve them a beverage, and how much kindness and how much humanness can be contained within that act. So I fell in love with coffee right out of high school, and throughout my journey in coffee, I was always looking for that kindness and that humanness. And I found that at Sudden Coffee. So we make amazing instant coffee. We serve it with kindness, with a human touch, and we make it accessible for everyone, regardless of your location geographically, and also like where you are in terms of familiarity with specialty coffee. And I'm lucky enough to lead product development. So everything around the coffee, from choosing the coffees to building the blends to working on the process, that's what I do, and it's a pretty rad job.
Very cool. One more big round of applause for Umeko. Then finally, we're going to bring up Molly Irwin. Molly is from Fellow Products, one of our fine sponsors here. Actually unrelated, but there's a fellow table back there. Molly, tell us your coffee story.
So my background, I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, and I actually have a background in robotics and consumer electronics, and I loved coffee as a consumer and decided my next step should be doing something in that space. So I'm working for Fellow Products, and we design beautifully functional tools for at-home coffee brewers to baristas in cafes. So we're trying to bridge the gap between the home and the cafe, and like bring you beautifully functional tools, not just functional, not just beautiful.
One more big round of applause for Molly. So speaking of which, Molly, let's dive into Fellow Products and talk about how Fellow relates. Talk about what we're looking up at here.
So here on one side you have our Stag pour-over kettle, which is a stovetop version, and at the back table you can see our new electric version that's coming out in September. And then the pour-over system, which consists of a double-walled vacuum-insulated stainless steel dripper, double-walled glass carafe, and tasting glasses. And this is a system designed, we've done several thoughtful things with it to try to help people who may not be familiar with pour-over coffee to be able to use that in their home, but at the same time not compromise with those features to make it unusable at a cafe. So for instance, the dripper has a drip cup on the bottom that also can be used as a measuring cup. So there are like 2 dots on the inside. 1 dot's for single serving, 2 dots is for double serving, so you can approximate without a scale what's the volume of the coffee that you want to use. And then on the carafe, you also have a single dot and a double dot, so you could approximate how much water to add when you're doing the pour over. And so that's basically.
So we're talking about fast, cheap, good. I think fast, we can put fast and easy in there. So in that way, like, what's wrong with using scales? We all use scales. Like, why don't you want people to use scales?
I do want people to use scales if you have one. We love Akaya. We've partnered with them with our pour-over electric kettle. Like, we want people to use scales, but it's a huge, like, hurdle to jump over for somebody who is like, oh yeah, I like to cook. Oh, I want to make coffee now. Well, I have a Keurig. Like, how are you going to get those people to like use a scale and all of this? Like, you need $500 worth of equipment all of a sudden in your kitchen to be able to get into pour over coffee, or you can pay $6 for your pour over down the street. So how do you bridge that gap?
So in that way, you're really trying to solve the problems of the home consumer. You know, professionals are going to do with it what they wish and what they want to. But talk a little bit more about that. We can pull up slide 8. a little bit more about the development. Like, what were the sort of problems that came up during the development that you really wanted to solve?
Sure. So we approach all of our designs as human-centered design. So we really want to get at what are the issues that people have with whatever the space is. For us, it's for coffee, specifically with pour over. So we'll sit down and we'll think about what are the things that people have problems with, and then interview people, talk to them, make rough prototypes, have them use that, and then gather what are these insights, those like key points that are like, why is this difficult for you at home to brew? And it turns out the equipment's one, the how much coffee do I use? How much water do I add? I don't know. Is it like tea? Can I just like put it together and then it'll be fine? Or does it have to be very, very exact?
I mean, in that research, I mean, did you find that people are pretty confused in general about these things?
If you have never had any experience with making your own coffee at home, maybe you've used a Mr. Coffee to like put coffee in and you stick it in and then it just push the button. They have absolutely no idea what to do. And when you go to the cafe, it's like the science lab kind of.
Very cool. So, Umeko, talk a little bit about Sudden Coffee. So Sudden is specialty instant coffee, again, based out here in San Francisco. So similarly, like, what were the sort of problems that Sudden has been facing, is trying to solve?
Oh, totally. A lot of our work has been around creating understanding. When we started was this idea of what instant coffee is, and we have worked so much on expanding that understanding. So right out of the gate, we were using coffees that were Ethiopian coffees, Kenyan coffees, beautiful specialty coffees with totally different profiles from what you would expect, from an instant coffee. Now I've been working on blends. I figured out a way to make blends that's really innovative, really interesting, and this is another way that we're expanding understanding and creating understanding so that people can really look at like the coffees that we're putting out. I have this calendar of blends that I'm so excited about, and really see that instant coffee is such an innovative medium with so much potential. So that is the work that I think has been really challenging and also so rewarding.
Well, talk a little bit. So we're almost jumping ahead in terms of like instant specialty coffee. Traditionally, a lot of us in this room, probably you included, have spent a lot of energy trying to say like, this is not good coffee. Our coffee that we're working with, and you worked for some specialty roasters, our coffee is good coffee, and here's the difference, sort of thing. And to take something that was sort of the purview and the wheelhouse of quote unquote cheap coffee and lower quality coffee, and now applying that, talk about that mashup. Like, why is that okay to do?
Why is it not okay?
Because it's been yucky. Right?
Right. Well, so there, I think it comes back to that kindness and that meeting people where they're at, and not just meeting people where they're at, but really celebrating people where they're at. I want to create something that anyone can enjoy, regardless of whether they have a Chemex at home or whether they have only ever used a Keurig or only ever used Folgers. And I love specialty coffee, and I'm so passionate about it, and want to present it in this way that is really kind and is really accessible.
Yeah. So, Kent, you're also in a similar sort of space. Can you just pull up slide 3? I gotta give you props for this packaging. It's really fun. So you're actually using, it looks like what I think, is it what I think it looks like?
You can say it.
Yeah, it's a cigarette flip-top box.
It is a flip-top box, just like cigarettes.
Yeah.
Correct.
So your company also is in a similar sort of space, making specialty instant coffee. I mean, ultimately, is it a garbage in, garbage out kind of situation, where if you're using cheap coffee and putting it through the process, that it maybe isn't going to be good, but being able to use good quality specialty coffee, put it through the process, there's nothing wrong with the process, it's more the source material?
It's definitely both. It's about the care put into the process as well, but most definitely garbage has been put in with traditional instant coffee, and zero care and effort has been made to source anything that's acceptable for people to be drinking. And yeah, the process of traditional instant coffee is just horrible. There's just no care to the end consumer, thought, consideration taken into representing coffee well whatsoever. So at Voila, what we tried to do is source great coffees from great roasters and be able to represent them well and extract them well to where there is that transparency. And that's what I think is so cool about instant coffee and specialty instant coffee, is we finally have room for transparency all the way from farm to roaster to cup. And I think that's really special and something that makes it really easy and lowers the barriers of entry for somebody at home to explore specialty for the first time.
Right. So I know a lot of these processes are proprietary. We don't want to talk about them from the stage, but in that way, like, I think one big curiosity, like in terms of the brewing part. I mean, what can you tell us? Like what you've done, we talked earlier, you've done some experiments. Like what can you tell us about the brewing side of things? Yeah,
so the brewing, our approach to it is we really wanted to represent each coffee well. We have several different coffees from different roasters. And so we take each coffee as its individual origin and roast profile, and we try to extract it and represent it the best way possible. And we do that in our form, and it's kind of like a filter or drip profile instant coffee, to where it's really clean, has a really crisp finish, and it's also really good iced.
Very cool. You have a bunch of packets inside. How many inside each box?
5 in each box.
Very cool. Very cool. Tony, so local, yes, please. Tell us a little bit about the company. What's going on here?
Yeah, so the short version is 2 years ago, Roy Choi and Daniel Patterson kicked off an Indiegogo campaign for this.
2 celebrity chefs, you could call them. Yep.
Yeah, and coming from kind of 2 different worlds that overlap a lot. Roy being kind of the instigator of the modern food truck movement with his Kogi barbecue taco truck in LA, and really having an ethic around kind of street food culture and feeding people, and kind of visiting communities and neighborhoods that maybe aren't like fine dining areas. And then Daniel coming from the very high end of 2 Michelin stars, fine dining in San Francisco, and this kind of mashup of can chefs and culinary creatives solve this problem of how to feed people in food deserts, how to create a sustainable business that gives people skills that are portable and addresses a laundry list of kind of challenging social issues. And I think that's still in its nascent stage 2 years later, and kind of working through the kinks. But
ultimately, it's sort of like, how do we solve the fast food problem?
Right. It's about kind of meeting people where they are and seeing, can you take some of these ideas about culinary technique or nutrition and do them maybe at scale, and maybe kind of put them into a vernacular where different audiences can embrace it and not necessarily have to buy into a lot of the sort of signifiers and things that we look at when we're looking at kind of fine dining or ethical dining.
So how does coffee fit into that?
So they reached out to me with not even really a challenge, just kind of a question of, if we did coffee for $1 a cup, would it suck? Like, is there a way to do that and make it work? And I sat down and kind of gave them a rap about, well, here's how I would approach it if I were you.
So first you said yes, and then you said yes, it'll suck. And then it has to suck, and here's why. And then you showed them a Chemex, and you showed them a V60.
Right.
You explained, you schooled them right.
Well, I mean, so coming off of, I guess to try to, again, give like a really short thesis, I think, in my time in Seattle at Victrola and my time at Intelligentsia, I always kind of felt that this third wave nascent thing that we were a part of was representing to our potential audience that coffee is this very challenging thing, which it is, it's true. But I think that we disempower a lot of our potential customers and allies, that we make this thing seem so unobtainable, so difficult, requiring expensive equipment, being fussy, that we tell people we have the best coffee in the world, and yet we screw it up half the time that we're serving it, and that's just kind of part of the conditions of specialty coffee. And I've always felt that narrative was really self-defeating and kind of driven by the fact that the leaders in coffee, a decade ago, the roasters that were kind of doing the best work, were also in this kind of hyper-competitive wholesale space, which was really the bulk of their business. And so in chasing differentiation, we've made coffee really unapproachable to an enthusiast class that would happily buy good beans and brew good coffee at home if the equipment weren't so costly and intimidating, and if the messages that we were putting out weren't that you needed 6 months of training on your stirring technique before you can get a decent cup of coffee, and you need a microgram scale. And so I've always kind of taken the approach, and I think with what I did with Tonks, my subscription business from earlier, was saying, like, if we take the first step of kind of giving people a really good product where we feel like we're getting as close to an A+ every time we can, and sort of eliminate the guesswork of which of these coffees off the shelf should you start with. And then, kind of have this interaction with people where you're meeting them where they are. If they have a blade grinder, great. You don't tell them step one is that they have to, go out and spend $200 on a new burr grinder. You sort of work the delta from whatever they were doing yesterday is the coffee that they're going to make with your product today, like such a market improvement that you've set them on the path towards indoctrinating them into our weird world. So fast forwarding into this, I think for me looking at it, I thought, look, I'm happy to give these guys advice and try to steer them in the right direction. And Daniel was quickly like, well, why don't you spin up a roasting company to supply us? And I was foolish enough to say yes, and couldn't resist the challenge. And I think we've talked a lot in the coffee world for years about kind of how bad restaurant coffee is and what a crime it is, and kind of waving our fist at celebrity chefs and restaurants for screwing up their coffee programs. And I think that part of that is that because we, and not to sort of lay out my indictment of where we are as an industry, but I think that we don't respect our customers enough to give us the validation that we're doing good work, that we look to, food writers and celebrity chefs. And I mean, from a marketing perspective, it makes sense. So
how do we get from there to $1 cup of
yeah,
coffee?
so in my first thought in saying yes to this was that what a mic drop moment it would be if we can do we're going to solve restaurant coffee, but we're going to do it in a fast food context. And the truth is that it's actually much easier to do good coffee in a fast food environment than it is in a fine dining environment. With local, we decided that the coffee production would be a back of house operation rather than a front of house operation. So you have the same people that are doing kind of line cook work and all the back of house stuff are responsible for maintaining the cleanliness of the coffee machine, for cycling through the air pots, I talked about this a little bit in that New York Times article that a lot of people have read. But the trick that Sumi Ali, who a lot of you know, came up with was, so we end up doing about 4 times the amount of cold coffee as we do hot coffee. So we're using a big Curtis brewer, 1.5 gallon batches, and we will cycle through those every hour, whether we've sold 1 cup or 20 cups, and pull those into a Cambro, throw those on the walk-in. And then at the end of the night, we do a cold brew concentrate batch and blend the two together in a certain ratio, and we end up with our cold coffee product for the next day.
Frankenstein coffee.
Right. So
yeah.
It's nearly zero waste, and that's one of the things that allows us to only charge $1 and still buy very good green coffee.
But is it good?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned cold coffee. we have a few categories in this general space of convenience. We were not able to get a bottled, what we call RTD, ready to drink product person for this particular panel.
Cowards.
But we can talk. I'm sorry?
Cowards.
Well, I mean, I think that is one of the largest. I mean, when we're talking about this space, it's sort of like it's the giant elephant in the room. But that said, I mean, fundamentally, especially for me, what's interesting about this topic is that we have this idea of specialty coffee. I talked about it earlier as being something like we're growing out of our adolescence. So part of that sort of analogy of adolescence is that we are defining what specialty coffee is through our actions, through what we do. A lot of the single cup stuff we've been doing over the past, decade plus is really saying like, this is a special thing, Now we see people going back more to batch brew and some of these other brewing methods because it's like we don't have to prove ourselves anymore and maybe we can relax. And so to some degree, what we're talking about here is what is our comfort level as an industry, as a community, and as individuals, as coffee professionals, as to how much we're pushing to where that line is between where specialty is and where, commercial, commodity, what have you kind of coffee is. So that's it. Umeko, tell me a little bit with Sudden Coffee, has it been confusing for people? Are they able to get it right away? Like in terms of your customer base, like what's that response been?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For our customers, primarily, it's the best coffee they've ever had. We're so lucky to have these really diehard customers who love the product, and for them, it isn't necessarily a matter of like, is this specialty, is it commodity? They're like, this is amazing coffee and I love it, and I love that you guys put a handwritten note in my order, and I love that you guys sent me like a cute little gift, and it makes my life so much easier, so I can do so much more in my day. So the conversation, with our customers has really been about like, yeah, the coffee's really good. So as far as like within the industry, I think it's really easy to say like, hey, yeah, we are using specialty coffee. We're using coffee that we buy roasted from 49th Parallel, which is one of the best roasters in the world. It's green that is sourced really ethically, and everyone in the value chain is being considered, and we are really proud of this product that's produced with so much care.
Molly, do the customers for the fellow products, do they think of this as like high-end specialty type product? Is it just like a general platform? Are people putting like grocery store sort of cheap coffee through their fellow gear? Like how have you seen the usage out there?
Well, there's like different worlds that we're going on. So we like sell our products in Williams-Sonoma, Crate and Barrel, Sur La Table. I would put those people in both categories actually, because very different customer bases for those shops. We also have our stuff in the MoMA gift shop, and so it's a high design product. We have them in various third wave coffee retail locations and shops. And it's really like you're having to like blend these worlds and find an overlap. And we want to be a bridge and a gap that's friendly and approachable for people on any side to be able to come and use these products and feel like they're able to make excellent coffee where either they didn't know how to before, or they're already have their collection of 25 pour overs, and this is another.
So straddling both worlds in that way. I mean, are you not seeing confusion? I mean, in general for us, it's like we tend to see like this is specialty something, this is for bad coffee. Like Tony talked about like blade grinders, whatever. Like that's not for anyone who's serious about it. This kind of grinder is, and so. I mean, you're seeing usage on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it's black and white, it's a gray scale, or a color scale, whatever. Like, you're never gonna find one product in for our stuff that is only one side or the other. Some people from the Folger's side might never touch our products because it's actually just too much for them or
Right.
to whatever. But like if you're interested and you are curious and you're investigative about the coffee, specialty coffee world, you will want to use our products to get you into, it's like a gateway drug, I guess.
Gotcha. Kent, have you seen, speaking of like, have you seen or heard about customers turning over from like a grocery store instant coffee over to the specialty instant?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's funny. We see a big 50-50 split between specialty drinkers and like normal coffee drinkers. But we've only given our coffee out to our Kickstarter backers, so we do have a small pool. But for the specialty drinkers, it's funny that they're so confused that there's not grounds in there because they're just so unfamiliar with what instant is. And then for instant drinkers, yeah, I mean, they're just blown away that it tastes better than the fresh cup of coffee they get at their local coffee shop and better than anything they make at home. And it's really exciting and gives me a lot of energy to see and hear stories about people who try it and say that they have had their coffee with cream and sugar for 10 years and they've never enjoyed a black cup of coffee. And they were on the road or they were camping and they didn't have cream and sugar, and it was the first time they finished a black cup of coffee and are converted. They actually use those words. They say like, I'm bought in. Like, this is how I want to drink coffee now. It was incredible and so smooth. And I think part of that is because there's no preconceived notions about what they're getting. It's just, I mean, it is what it is. They put in the cup. They don't have to know anything. They don't have to know about ratios and blade grinders and this and that, you know. And they can just walk into it from like what everybody's been saying, like where they're at.
We're going to open up to overall discussion with everybody. But before that, I want to touch, like kind of finish up talking a little bit more about that idea of where people are. Like 3 of you have said that. Actually, all of you have said that in a different way. And in a way, this is the thing that one might pinpoint as being a disruptive thing that's actually very different, right? Is that up to now, we've been a little bit pushy maybe, very insistent and prescriptive about, like, if you want a great coffee experience, here are the 64 easy steps, quick and easy steps, in order to get there, whether you're making it at home or, oh, you want great coffee? Just come to the most difficult parking area in San Francisco and, you know, circle the block for 2 hours. And then if you're able to find one, walk the 8 blocks and come into one of our shops, stand in line for 45 minutes, you know, and then have someone grab your wrong drink. And then take all that whole experience and to completely change it into a different way. Like, Omeko, you and I talked about that a little bit. Tell me more. Like, you talk about kindness. That's really interesting.
Yeah, well, so I guess first, you know, the blade grinder thing. As an industry, you know, and I was part of this when I started in coffee too. It's easy for us to become fixated and on this sort of dogma of you brew your coffee in this way and then it's specialty, and it's kind of like, well, how, like, somebody, you know, the person who like grew this coffee, are you going to tell them like, no, it's not specialty anymore because, you know, somebody ground it with a blade grinder. So, you know, no, like, this is a really beautiful product, and it is specialty coffee, and it has that integrity. And no matter whether you use a blade grinder or a burr grinder, and what we're doing is a lot more than that. It's a bigger picture. So for me, you know, like I think of my part in this as being human and welcoming and sharing this thing that was created and touched by so many hands with so much immediacy and so much care and so much skill, and just really presenting that to people in a way that helps them feel just as excited about it as I am, just as appreciative as I am, you know. And we on our, you know, like on our website, it's like you can go to our website and you can learn all the stats on the farm where this coffee comes from, or you cannot, you know.
It's an opt-in kind of situation. Sure.
Yeah, totally. And so again, it just comes back to like, this is really good coffee that we are serving with kindness, and we are making it something that's very welcoming and very accessible.
Tony, tell us more. Meeting people where they are. What does that mean for Yes Please and for local? And for you, for that matter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, riffing off what you're saying, and kind of, I think, to the point of the question is, is it necessary if the product is specialty, if we know that we're sourcing good coffee, that we're happy with all the practices up to the point of that product and that retail experience, how necessary is it for the person on the receiving end of that to buy into all of the other sort of second order things about why that product is special? Do we need their validation right in that moment of anything other than the fact that this is a product that tastes good? So I think that's kind of where that, in the context of kind of an orthodox third wave coffee shop, I think you feel like you want people to buy into the whole picture. You want to get them a partisan for our team and our movement. And I feel like we've maybe kind of crested that a little bit. I think probably years ago we hit the ceiling of, where the sort of cultural relevance of latte art and third wave coffee, at least in cities where it's as ubiquitous as it is here, that we're already kind of the butt of jokes and comedy, like everybody knows what.
I think avocado toast has taken some of the heat off of us, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thankfully. So now it's I think for what we're doing at inside of local, and what I think some of these new product areas represent is that maybe without adhering to kind of all the messaging inside of like modern third wave coffee shops, we're finding a bigger audience that if I were pitching a business right now, I would try to spin up some sort of charts and numbers that show, the billions of dollars that are flowing inside of the coffee industry, of which all of us here, the broad spectrum of what we represent here, are just this tiny fraction of. And you think about where people are spending their consumer dollars on coffee and how little of that we're capturing. And I think that, the neighborhood coffee shop is always going to be an institution that will thrive in the right places and have its right audience. But if kind of the broader vision of what we care about at origin and what we care about in specialty coffee, if it's going to be growing and sustainable, then we need to attack these other kind of market opportunities in that white space.
But let's take the contrarian view for a second, which is, again, if we're trying to define what high-end specialty is, and each one of you all, in a way, in terms of your work, is challenging that idea a bit. And I guess it begs the question, is the industry ready for it? Are people ready for it? Tony, when the news broke about the dollar cup of coffee, personally, it became a big question. It's not so much that I felt that we were under siege, but it was just a question worth asking. Is this, are we ready for this right now? Or the argument could be are we too early? Are we too early in things where we're just trying to get to know people, and then all of a sudden it's like this sudden change. It's like you're starting a new relationship, and then all of a sudden, very early through, on the third date, all of a sudden you show up looking completely different and talking with a different accent, kind of thing almost. I
think it's an open question. In the Watts neighborhood, there is not a third wave coffee shop. There probably won't be anytime soon. I don't want to presume that because things can change fast. But I think, I don't think it's too early. If anything, I think it's maybe a little too late, that we've kind of experienced a bit of a backlash from from a broader consumer against kind of the pretense of what they assume high-end specialty coffee is about, that it isn't seen by a lot of people as, as an everyday drink. It's like a luxury category of beverage. And I always trot out the analogy with kind of craft beer and the craft beer movement, which has done a very good job, I think, of having kind of an aesthetic, intellectual connoisseurship parity between people inside of the industry, the real experts, and then the people on the consumer side. And I think in coffee, we are still struggling to find ways to get non-industry consumers to kind of have at least some Venn diagram overlap with how we look at coffee. And I think that we should try as many new models as we can. I don't think that dollar coffee is necessarily a model that needs to go too far to explore that, but I think in certain contexts that looking at, can we do things at scale or pricing or, different product categories, different distribution channels, different styles of coffee bar, different styles of experience inside of coffee bars to kind of shake that up and be less of less seen as kind of one aesthetic of
Kent,
service.
your business is taking specialty coffee and with the instant sort of side, whereas you might take the coffee house out of it. In terms of that idea of being a premium product, like you're positioned to price a little bit on the high, like a pour over sort of price at a cafe. Talk about that decision a little bit.
Yeah, so our price point breaks down, so we ship a box of 5 packs for $20. And so that comes in shipped at $4 a cup. That's where it starts, and price breaks with quantity from there on our subscription model. And the idea behind that being, my feeling is that we don't necessarily have to play in the realm of traditional instant coffee. We can say, yes, this is extremely high quality product, and with high quality products, there usually is a price correlation there. And we want to represent coffee well and represent these really great coffees and say, yes, you are getting a pour over quality coffee, but accessible anywhere. And so I feel there's pros and cons to both sides of that spectrum. Obviously that may turn a lot of people away, but I think there's something to be said also in justifying a really premium product, even though it is instant.
Right. Molly, we'll finish up with you. And are there compromises that you've had to make on the sort of like end product, like how well it brews, in order to simplify and make it easier for people?
I want to say no, but there are compromises everywhere. Anytime you do anything that you do, you have to make compromises about it because you have all of these different trade-offs. And even with the question of fast, cheap, good, for creating products, we talk about time, quality, cost. And you really pick two or really just pick one because you have to optimize for one. And when we approach the design for the products, we want what's most important to our end customer, and understanding who our end customer is, like which side, which part of the scale are we going to look at. We want to spread our net as wide as possible to catch as much of all the markets that we can, because we care about who those customers are and want to bring them into the coffee world if they haven't been, and if they're in the coffee world already, do what's most important for those people. So we really stand on the barista side and say, hey, what's important for making excellent specialty coffee, and then how can we bridge over to the people who don't know how to do this already. So I would say, yes, we have to make compromises, but we really want to keep the excellence as our quality is number one.
Gotcha, sounds good. So one of the things that I feel like I really learned through getting to know each of you and what your work is the idea that there has been a fairly unified, loosely, but still fairly unified voice in this third wave specialty coffee category. And whether we're ready for it or not is sort of irrelevant. That's part of living in a capitalistic sort of society, right? In an economy that way. But what's been comforting is realizing that regardless of some of the unintended consequences, that what we're all talking about up here really does fundamentally represent that idea of trying to meet more people, new people, maybe unreached people where they are, where they don't, we've heard mentioned, where they might not live next to one of our cafes, or doesn't have that accessibility, or has a certain lifestyle where they don't, coming into a cafe is not convenient or somewhat realistic, right? And so in that way, to be able to look at it as a certain type of extension of our hospitality as an industry and as individual brands and as individual people as well. So that all said, thanks so much. Thank you to all our panelists.